Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. This is some thoughts, consideration. I spend much of the day today laying down, uh, recuperating, and conducting studies. Tobadi Gokadao, Torah Bhagavad Gita, Digha Nikaya, Dhammapada, Gospels, Quran, and Tao Te Ching. Working on an assignment. And in that process, during that process, listening to music. Some may find that disagreeable. We can reason about that, but for the moment, I will share that one of the musicians, the groups that I've listened to is Audio Pharmacy. So I share that to provide a context, a preface for what I share now. The consideration. These are considerations that are shared here with I and I earlier in previous days and time. Yet now it is being shared in an increasingly tangible, social way. So the first consideration is that you, I, all are spirit being, and in the process of our respective and collective formation, the spirit exists first. That spirit being, that spirit being. And around the spirit, body is formed. The earthly is formed. The body is formed. The nature of the spirit being, we can spend lifetimes approximating that and discussing it and studying it, how others do it before us. At the moment, comparatively simply, we have the eternal, the Most High. That is everything. That is within everything. That provides everything. And then as a perceived individual, the spirit within I and I is eternally fused with the eternal, the Most High, continually. Inevitably, irreversibly, involuntarily. That's nature. So, how do we have this perception of distinction of individual self, body, choice? And it is when we, I and I, each respectively, communicate with Creator in that phenomenon of choice, that perception, that semblance of distinction is manifested, and then body forms around spirit being according to choice. The perception of choice. And life surrounds the body. We can talk about karma. We can talk about reincarnation. This is the framework that is shared here is a standalone effective sequence. We are of the omni, and then with that distinction of choice, spirit being becomes distinct whilst continually connected. And then when spirit being is distinct body forms around the spirit being. And life progresses. There's an addendum here. We're going to pause on the addendum to complete the three considerations, main considerations for the moment, at this moment. So that's the first consideration. Spirit being exists first. Body forms around spirit being. Spirit being is established through the phenomenon, the semblance of choice, decision, will, individual will. But even that's simply a negotiation and a continuation of the Omni, the Most High, known by many names. That's consideration número uno. Consideration número dos. Consideration número dos is, as spirit being progresses in life with this perception of choice, there are many paths, tangible paths that the spirit being can take, can proceed along, infinite, all different types of directions. There's sometimes big divergences, sometimes very nuanced divergences that can meander very close to each other and maybe gradually split apart additionally. But what we eat, who we talk with, from the very beginning through life, progresses on a series of branches. Here's a consideration. This is a little bit out there. Consideration is that every being we encounter in life is ourselves, progressing along one of those paths that we decide away from, respectively. And the body forming around that choice, the decision accordingly, so that when we encounter that being, the being looks different. Sometimes the being looks similar, sometimes the being looks exactly the same, depending on the path that being is progressing along. But the being is simply ourselves. And that one choice that we decided in a different direction. And that being encountering all the other subsequent decisions from that different decision. So that spirit being that we encounter in front of us might seem further angry, might seem further happy, might seem further rich, might seem further poor. And all these different types of temporal distinctions. But it's simply ourselves progressing along decisions that we differentiate from. That's a consideration. There's a lot further that goes with that, but that's the second consideration for the moment. One other thing along those lines, particularly for brethren, men, seeing other men in this life, and then seeing the women. Oh, I could have had that woman. Oh, she could be my wife today. Or da 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 da. Those are part of the consequences of the decisions. And part of the consideration is, rather than being jealous or angry or envious or proud or whatever, consideration is being mindful, being appreciative for what this is, and being prudent in continuing to make decisions in this life. Eventually, there is the return to Omni, amidst all the decisions, reconciliation. So, there's that. Numero tres, the third joint for today is consideration concerning the world civilization. There's the notion of one heart, one love, and similarly, one earth and one tree. One love, one earth, one tree. That tree being a family tree. That's in a philosophical kumbaya type sense, all being part of the same kinfolk on this earth. Much of a stretch for many kinfolk today, for many years, for centuries, for generations and millennia. But in that philosophical, transcendent, spiritual sense, one family. Yet further, tangible, one tree, in a civilizational sense. Now, this is something for further reasoning, but just share this at the moment. The consideration is the earth being one civilizational tree, the roots being established within the central diameter, the equator of the earth, and the branches extending towards the polarities of the earth. And all the people, all the societies, all the civilizations through history, progressing from that foundation and framework, the roots being around the equator, the branches reaching towards the polarities, that influencing people's physiology, relationship with nature, cold, hot, and the different distinctions within different regions concerning altitude, moisture, and additionally, and then from that, culture, knowledge, innovations, inventions, technology, rituals, relationship with the nature in the immediate areas, and additionally. And amidst those differentiations of culture, there being distinct proclivities that are generally associated with each respective culture. Some cultures valuing further relationship with other people, other life beings, with the earth. Some societies, some cultures valuing ideas, the expanse of the universe, exploration, and further. It's all part of the same tree. The nature of the roots and the nature of the branches. There's legitimacy within each of these. There's necessity within each of these. And there are kinfolk in any part of these civilizations that are in the rooted areas and the branching areas that have proclivities that are complementary. There are kinfolk who have rooted natures that live from and within branching cultures. And there are kinfolk who live within rooted cultures that have branching proclivities. So it's a matter of observing and being mindful of the nature and conditions, and optimizing the experience of well-being, cooperation, harmony amidst the differentiation, the distinctions. Now, where does that come from? Where does that consideration? How is that derived? Study. The ancients teach us this. Observation of the history of civilization, the migrations, and further. There's, when studying further the ancient teachings, even looking at Torah and the narrative of the Exodus from Mitzrayim, that being a very pivotal moment in Earth civilization, between going from the Afrocentric paradigm of civilization to a northern Eurasian paradigm of Earth civilization from black to white, and progressing further. So um, there's evidence of this within. We can look at the Vedas. We can look at additional teachings from additional cultures, even Menke from China, and additionally, when we see elements of one, and then we can connect that with similar elements within another. Some of it explicit, some of it subtle. Um, it becomes increasingly evident. That's one. That's some way we can look at spiritual revelation of messaging that I and I experience directly, that others experience directly, and additionally, and bring these together and reason and articulate the sense of that. That's another methodology through which this is shared. And then we can also just look at plain, simple logic. And if we recognize, like, at some point, life begins, human or humanoid life begins on this earth. And we have all different type of narratives from all different type of cultures about that, and respect to each one, because all of it is has legitimacy. There's truth within each of it, and so it's for us to find the congruence when things just seem so much contradictory and disagreeable. So there's congruence. There's divine congruence within all of it. So, but just logic, when recognizing life as humanoid life as we understand it today, as I understand it today, people have needs. People need a certain amount of temperature to not freeze to death, to not evaporate or dehydrate from lack of moisture and overheating. So we also recognize at some point life begins. Like people, whether it was the chicken or the egg first, at some point people need to live throughout an entire year in a very basic way without having advanced, like, a semblance of technology. So that requires being able to live like an animal, essentially, primordially, without innovations, without tools, throughout the entire year. So being without clothing, being without like advanced or proper shelter, being in the elements. Where on earth today that I and I know of can people live throughout the year, from year to year, in those kind of conditions? And we can recognize there are a few places. There are a lot of places on earth where people can live for a portion of the year, but then it gets cold and it's inclementable, unable to survive just as a humanoid without the fur, without the other elements to make preparations for that. So people can venture to certain regions through a portion of the year, but have to return back to the places where it's warm and the climate is hospitable. So again, we recognize it is the areas around the equator, and primarily Africa, but we also see it within the Western Hemisphere in the rainforest of the Yanomami. And we also see, when we look at the illustrations that humanoids provide concerning the world, the earth, the geography, we also see a congruence of the continents there as well, which is an additional consideration, and that's a little bit of a side joint. But just, again, pure logic, where could people live at the very beginning without having even like the basic tools to prepare for life? And whether the being begins as a newborn child, or whether beings begin as grown adults, still, where would beings be able to live in the garden experience that we hear from our narratives? There are different narratives from different cultures, but the garden experience is one of the shared guidances from these narratives. So where could that be on this earth that people could live, that we know of today, live continually throughout the year, throughout the entire throughout the entire orbit of the earth around the soleil? And then recognizing that pure logic, how do people migrate from that place to other places? And now that's where we begin the narrative, and that's where things become increasingly involved, complex, and it's honest, it's legitimate, and that's further grounds for reasoning. Uh, Yet that foundation teaches us a lot, teaches us much, and guides us much. So um, we recognize where circumstances are today, where people live today. We have many narratives of how these migrations occur, at least from some point in history over the recent thousands of years. There are differentiations, some slight differentiations in the narratives, but there's a general consensus about the general framework, and so we can from that then begin to deduce some rationalization of these migrations and further. But that's further compounded consideration. But again, from the very basic logic, um, we that is what I and I observe. So those are the three considerations. Now, the first joint I mentioned, there's a further addendum to that joint about spirit being and the body being formed around the being and then continuing in life. Another consideration along those lines, again, with that mindfulness of spirit being and body, recognizing people talk about the body as the temple. We can recognize in our body, the interior of our body, as the garden itself, the paradise itself. And everything that we introduce to the garden, effecting the garden of paradise within ourselves, physically, interiorly, whatever we introduce into that garden of paradise within ourselves, effecting the conditions and the well-being of the garden of paradise within ourselves. So when we're eating plants, when we're having tea, when we're drinking water, that's very conducive towards continuing the well-being and the harmony of the garden of paradise within ourselves. When we have things that are excessive, then we're changing the conditions within the garden of paradise within ourselves. The beings, quote unquote, or just the, it gets a little bit complicated. The point is not to get so definitive, but the life, and even that's a little bit much. The well-being within the garden of paradise is affected by excesses, by deprivation. And so we can just, again, imagine or picture or look at a garden paradise that we see on earth today and see what happens when there's an excess of the vegetation, or there's an excess of water, or excess of elements, and what happens when there's a deprivation of water, when there's a deprivation of nutrients, what happens in that respect. And then further, and here comes the vegan train. But again, when we introduce the flesh of animals, we are introducing that death within the garden of paradise within ourselves. And if that cow is killed in a very quote unquote congenial way, still there's a dead cow haunting the garden of paradise within ourselves. If the cow is killed in a heinous way, there's an angry, hurt, painful cow lurking and haunting the recesses within the garden of paradise within ourselves, and affecting all the elements, the organs, and additionally within our interior garden of paradise. Same thing, any animal. It causes a disturbance within the garden of paradise. Predatoriness and additionally within the garden of paradise within ourselves. And we can see certain physical manifestations of that indigestion, dis-ease, and additionally obesity, bulimia, all the different types of eating disorders, and additionally because of what we are introducing into the garden of paradise. Um, that's physical, um, chemicals, uh, what we're introducing into the Garden of Paradise with what we consume materially is the material, but it's also the psychological experience as well, the psychic, the mental experience, the emotional, the heart experience, the spirit experience of the life that we are bringing within ourselves, whether it's plant life, whether it's animal life, or otherwise. The chemistry, the pollutants, the poisons, where the poisons come from, who is conjuring those poisons, what those people are going through, what's happening, what's being done to those people through from the very beginning. That's what's being introduced into the Garden of Paradise. Um, One of the reasons why it's beneficial to be mindful of what we introduce to the Garden of Paradise, because again, that influences the well-being, and that well-being influences our physical actuality, our mental actuality, our heart actuality, and our spiritual actuality. So that's further consideration about spirit, being, and body, and how we sustain life amidst our spirit, being, and body. So this is said after just having a bag of potato chips and some fried corn tortillas, and some processed salad dressing, and some other types of junk food. So um, that's that's the experience that I and I share. Um, so this is part of the exhaust that is being manifested from that digestion. So we say go from the digestion to the libation. How about that? Libation. So that's what we share today. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Love and peace.